Alright, so today we're going to cover these two home-sized, lightweight pottery jewelry kilns. They're both made in the US, and they both use standard 110 volt plugs. On the left we have the 2016 Evenheat Kingpin 88. On the right we have the 2013 Paragon SC3. Now it's got the Century Express 4.0 controller, which is the same controller used in the latest model, so it should be pretty good. Alright, so we'll start with the small differences like physical dimensions and performance metrics, but we'll talk about some major differences we found in use. Alright, so starting with the size, the Evenheat, the Kingpin, is smaller in the exterior, and it's also got a smaller chamber. It's got a 0.22 cubic foot interior chamber. The Paragon's got a 0.28 cubic foot chamber. Really what it comes down to is they're both about 8 by 8 width and depth. This one is just a little bit taller by about an inch and a half. That's the only difference. Now, when it comes to what you get, the documentation, I found that the documentation with the Paragon was much more comprehensive, easier to understand, a lot of diagrams, including quick start cheat sheets. The Evenheat manual was pretty sparse. It was like a bunch of checklists, so it was just hard to read, hard to use. Not terrible, but you know, it's not as good as the Paragon. The controller, the Evenheat uses a controller for, they look similar, don't they? They've got a simple display with 3 buttons, but they're actually made by different manufacturers. The controller on the Evenheat is made by Bartlett Instruments, and the Paragon uses a Orton ceramics controller. Now, that doesn't seem like a big deal, but actually is when we get to actual usage. We'll cover that later. But as far as the use, just the UI, user interface, the Evenheat controller has more presets for different kinds of metal clays, which is sort of nice. But the Paragon has it's much easier to use for manual starts. For example, you can just quickly do speed 1 through speed 5 and just start a manual session. So I found this one to be easier to use for manual settings. Both controllers have user programmable programs where you can set multiple ramp and hold steps, so that's pretty much about the same. As far as actual power usage, we plugged in the power meter, put it on full power, full ramp rate, and this one used 1340 watts. 13 and 40 watts, you know, it's got a smaller chamber. This one used 1500 watts, a little more power, but it's got a little bit bigger chamber. And when we look at the power cord, accordingly, the Paragon power cord, which is on the right, is bigger, thicker wire, and it just seems beefier. The Evenheat's just a almost too small cord, but it does work. So what was the actual performance? On full power, the Evenheat went from ambient temperature, maybe like it was same day, both of them same day around. Actually, it was a hot day. It was about 100 degrees Fahrenheit. Went up to 1500 degrees Fahrenheit in 30 minutes. The Paragon went to 1500 degrees Fahrenheit in 33 minutes, which is pretty darn close. It's got a bigger chamber, but also uses more powerful. But this is also a little bit older, so take that in consideration. At 1500 degrees Fahrenheit, both didn't overshoot much, maybe 1 or 2 degrees, and held steady at plus or minus 1 or 2 degrees. So high temperature performance was very good. But we'll cover low performance temperature next, which actually was a major differentiator. You might use lower temperatures for things like tempering metals. So for example, the Paragon, we set it at 500 degrees Fahrenheit at full power. It went up to 500 degrees, didn't overshoot by much, maybe a few degrees here and there, and held steady within 1 or 2 degrees. Very nice. Didn't matter what temperature you set, Always was rock solid, didn't overshoot, and held steady. The Evenheat, on the other hand, at low power, we have a little bit of a disaster. We set it to 500 degrees Fahrenheit at full power, and it overshot by 50 to 100 degrees. That's a lot. Even after waiting 30 minutes to let it settle down, it went into a pattern where it would go under 5 to 10 degrees. Then it would start heating it up, but then it would overshoot by 10 to 20 degrees. And it just kept repeating that pattern. So the swing in steady state was a 30-degree swing at 500 degrees Fahrenheit. That's a lot. I repeated this test multiple times, and is always the same. You can compensate for the large initial overshoot by using a lower ramp rate, so don't use full ramp rate. If you lower the ramp rate, you can get the overshoot down to about 30 degrees, 20 to 30 degrees, which is same as the steady state swing. And it didn't matter how low you set the ramp rate, is always overshot by 20 to 30 degrees, and goes under by 5 or 10, goes over by 20, goes under by 10. So there's a lower limit on how good it can get. So that's a problem. Low temperatures is not as good as the Paragon. So that's a big difference, and that might be due to the controller. Also might be due to maybe the thermocouple. Maybe the thermocouple has a delay on it, causing it to overshoot. But either way, it's from the factory, so I blame it on the product. Okay, so how much does it cost to operate or repair? Now, this Evenheat, they both use a ceramic fiber muffle where the element is embedded in it. So the element should last a couple years. You know, there are some people online that use them day in, day out for 4 years before it burned out. So that's pretty decent. But when you do replace it, you replace the muffle at the same time. So it can be a little higher than just the element. The muffle on the Evenheat Kingpin runs around $240 online. The muffle for the Paragon runs around $330 online, so it's a little more expensive. The muffle on the Paragon is a little more expensive. Both use a mechanical relay, so that's pretty cheap to replace. So in summary, I would say the Paragon is bigger and better, but the Evenheat is cheaper to operate. That's the summary. It's hard to choose between the two. I would still pick this one, the Paragon. For a bonus topic, you'll find there's a lot of kilns and furnaces on sale on eBay using one of these Chinese Rex C100 PID controllers. It's a very cheap controller using a lot of furnaces and kilns, and they do work. The problem is that the instructions are terrible, and forget about user programs. So you basically set a temperature and turn on and off. That's what it's good for. Forget about user programs with multiple ramp and hold times. So in that case, I think it's fine for a furnace, but I don't think it's as useful for a pottery or jewelry kiln. Anyways, hope that helps you. Good luck in your purchase.